A pair of freshmen for the Duke men's basketball team were quite spectacular throughout the season. One of them winning ACC Rookie of the Year here in 2022-2023. It's an end-of-season review for Kyle Filipowski and Mark Mitchell, and it starts right now on Locked On Blue Devils.
Hi, everybody. Dick Vitale. Hey, make sure you listen, man, to Locked On Blue Devils with J.J. Jackson. He's awesome, baby.
You are Locked On Blue Devils, your daily podcast on the Duke Blue Devils, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everybody, and welcome into another episode of the Locked On Blue Devils podcast. It's so great to have you here with us on this Monday, May 1st, 2023. Hard to believe it, but the month of May has arrived, and we're continuing the great content here on the podcast, discussing everything going on in the life of Duke athletics, and so grateful that you're taking some time to listen to us each and every day. If you haven't done so already, please be sure to follow and subscribe to this podcast for free. Wherever you get your podcasts, we're available on all of the great podcast platforms out there. You can watch the show daily, each and every day on YouTube. We encourage you to subscribe to our YouTube channel as well. Follow us on Twitter at LO_Blue Devils and follow me on Twitter at _JJ_Jackson_. On today's show, my very good pal Josh Smith from the Devil's Den podcast is going to be on the show with us here today, as we're going to be talking about the years that were for Kyle Filipowski and Mark Mitchell. As always, go support the Devil's Den podcast. Leave those guys a 5-star rating and review. Your support means the absolute world. So without further ado, let me bring on my good pal Josh. And Josh, it's hard to believe it, man. Here we are. The month of May has arrived. Yeah. John Rothstein always deems that we sleep in May in the world of college basketball. And so we're going to do that. We're going to start some of these end-of-year reviews coming up. I hope you're doing well, my friend.
I am. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So let's get into it. Let's talk about the year that was for a pair of freshmen for the Duke men's basketball team. Talked about a couple of backcourt guys last week in Jeremy Roach and Tyrese Proctor. But I want to start with Kyle Filipowski, the ACC Rookie of the Year. Big picture, tell me what you thought of Filipowski.
Yeah, I think in the summer coming in, there were a little bit of reports and concerns about how ready he was going to be, what that was going to look like. He shot up the rankings in high school.
Yeah.
But I think if you look at it, I mean, he was kind of our best player. He was our most available player, showed up every night. There were some ups and downs there, but for the most part, he was our warrior out there. Like I said on our pod, maybe even with you before, that guy took a beating this year too. Yeah. So just shouts to him just for meeting the physicality challenge.
And just living up to expectations that were there. And I think in many cases surpassing them, right? I think as we talk about the year that was, and you're quick to point out what the thought was going into the year, I think that's important when you kind of reflect on what someone was able to deliver. No one really expected Kyle Filipowski to be the strongest amongst the freshmen, the strongest amongst players on the entire team. Like nobody expected that. And yet night in and night out, he continuously delivered.
Yeah. And I think, maybe some of that is just due to his availability. Obviously, we had a lot of injuries early on. And so, Whitehead basically breaking his leg and being out, Lively not being up to speed. You're kind of going through the roster and like, who else are we going to build this offense around? It's got to be Flip. And, just his ability to space. I know the 3-point shooting, you're hoping for a little bit of improvement there, but the shot looks good. The mechanics look fine. The free throw shooting is definitely elite for a big man. So that should translate, going into next year. But he became our alpha, I think he had over 30% usage. So he was our guy.
Yeah. I mean, played in all 36 games for Duke. We've got the numbers here on the screen. If you're watching us here on YouTube, the podcast version, I'll let you know again, 36 games played for Filipowski, 15.1 points per game, 8.9 rebounds, 1.6 assists. And we highlight the 3-point number, 28.2% from 3-point range, more on that 3-point shooting in just a little while. But right out of the gates, those expectations are in place. And next thing you know, Kyle Filipowski does something that no other player in the history of Duke men's basketball does, and he has 4 double-doubles to start his college career. The scoring numbers weren't mind-boggling or anything like that, right? We've certainly seen more freshmen score more points in their Duke career. But the fact that he was able to score and rebound as effectively as he was to get the season started, I think that surprised a good number of people too. And it was an early indicator of like, all right, we got something here with this guy.
Yeah, the rebounding was something that I think pretty much stuck too. I'm obviously not quite at that level as those first 4 games, but that might have been his best quality. I mean, so many of those shots, especially from 2 that he was missing, he's cleaning up himself. I mean, getting all of those offensive boards, a lot of garbage buckets. Now, maybe you could argue, well, some of the finishing, you'd like to see that improve, sure, but he's tracking balls. He's meeting guys at the rim, and so just that ability alone makes him super valuable on both sides.
We're going to be able to talk about some of the things to improve for Filipowski in his sophomore season coming up at the end of today's show, but I definitely think utilizing that size is something that can improve going into the second season. And then also the three-point shooting, right? The outside shot that we were expecting from Filipowski. And I don't have the numbers in front of me here, but if you were to dig up and look at those advanced stats, it feels as though, and the numbers would likely back this up, that Filipowski started off the year a much better three-point shooter than he finished the season, which typically is the exact opposite when you're looking at a freshman in college basketball, right? Isn't that strange? I mean, the longer the year went on, the worse the three-point shot got for Flip.
Yeah, he had that really just bad stretch, like in the middle third, like the middle portion of the conference schedule there, or kind of, I guess, around the first of the year or so, that lingered. And I think he went like multiple games without making one. Finally, he broke through. But you're right, it definitely didn't seem to consistently get back to what he was doing earlier in the year. And I don't know if that's just a mechanics thing or just, guys are finding him. Certainly he started to become, more of the defensive game plan. So maybe those shots just weren't as there.
No doubt.
And playing the 4, if he's playing the 5, you have a much bigger guy coming out to rotate. They're probably not going to try to press up on you that much because they don't want you to beat him off the bounce. Playing the 4, especially in college, you guarding a lot of wings that aren't afraid to get up into you and deny that outside, try to force him to put the ball on the floor, which, was kind of hit or miss.
And you wonder if the physical work itself kind of started to wear down on him, right? I mean, at the end of the day, he's a freshman, a young body. Filipowski didn't even bother testing the NBA draft process, but if he did, I would imagine a lot of scouts and people in front of offices would say, yep, going to need you to bulk up a little bit more before you try to translate this to the next level. And playing 36 games in Division I college basketball for a program like Duke in the ACC, that's a demanding and physical challenge for anybody to kind of go through. But I'm glad we're in agreement there that it certainly did feel like that shooting dropped off as the season went on, which is a little bit different than the majority of his teammates even.
Sure. Yeah. And just across the board, right? Like our 3-point shooting was just so inconsistent, so hit or miss. It's like for a while there, we were going up like 9 for 23 in all of our wins, and then like 3 of 21 in all of the losses. Mark Mitchell, we'll talk about him in a little bit, I guess, but kind of the same thing. Started off the year on fire. I mean, he was at like 46% from 3. I think he finished at like 35 or so. Right. And, just really only Derek and I guess Proctor were the 2 that kind of, offset that a little bit. They got really hot, but maybe just freshmen, sometimes that stuff doesn't translate.
Let's talk about one of those other freshmen. As you mentioned, we got to continue this end-of-year review. Kyle Filipowski, who we just were able to break down. And now, Mark Mitchell. What is Mark Mitchell doing next season, and what did we like about his freshman year that was? That conversation in just a moment here on Locked On Blue Devils. Locked On Blue Devils here today is brought to you by our very good friends over at FanDuel. Make a fast break to FanDuel right now during the NBA playoffs. New customers get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's $1,000 back in bonus bets if your first bet doesn't win. It's got an incredible app that's very easy to use, safe and secure, and you can get paid instantly. Great promotions every single day happening throughout the playoffs. There's no better action for playoff action than America's #1 sports book. FanDuel.com/lockedon and get a no sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon, as FanDuel is an official betting partner of the NBA. Moving forward here on today's episode of Locked On Blue Devils, JJ Jackson alongside Josh Smith. All right, Mark Mitchell, big picture. What'd you like about his freshman year?
Yeah, they call him easy, right? And it just seems to be that for him. So many games where you don't really notice him on the floor, and then you look at like the box score, and then particularly you look at who he was guarding, and 0 for 8, 1 for 9, 2 for 10, 3 for 11. Just was routinely able to shut guys down on that end. Like we mentioned earlier, the 3-point shooting started out very low volume, so he's not taking a ton, but he seemed to know where that bread was buttered, in those corners and those wing spots, those catch and shoot threes. You think of that Notre Dame game, had some big moments there, and just a prototypical kind of Duke wing if you look through our history, and that's Mark Mitchell.
Yeah, no, we'll take a look at what he was able to accomplish in his freshman season. Mark Mitchell, somebody that up until the very last game, the Tennessee game, as we spend a lot of time talking, had played in every single contest. So once again, we've got the numbers here on the screen. Our podcast listeners, 35 games played for Mark, 9.1 points per game, 4.5 rebounds per game, 1.2 assists per contest, and that 3-point number, Josh, you nailed it a little bit earlier, 35.2% shooting from 3-point range. When you look at those numbers, does anything stand out to you, or does it sort of make sense with what your eyes told you throughout the course of the year?
Yeah, I think the 4.5 rebounds, to me, because he's playing the 3 and he's playing with Flip, who we just talked about how good of a rebounder he was. He's playing with Derek Lively on the floor as well, or even a Ryan Young, who's also a plus rebounder. So to get 5 rebounds a game from technically that 3 spot, I mean, that's pretty good. And I think, maybe this year we'll see him a little bit more at the 4. Things might open up a little bit depending what happens in the portal. And I would expect that to go up. I mean, you saw that if he needed to, he could totally be a 7, 8 plus kind of rebound guy from that position.
Yeah, no, I'm excited to see how the rebounding improves for Mark going into year 2. A thought on the number here from me, 9.1 points per game. As we know, Duke only lost one single game the entire season when Mark Mitchell got to double figures. So if he got 10 points, there was a really, really strong chance that Duke was going to be victorious. Why do you think that was? What do you think it was about his game that kind of translated to that success?
I just think it could open things up when he gets going. Yep. Yeah, when he gets going, you think of that Syracuse game where I think he had 5 or 6 assists. When he was able to get into that middle, he takes good shots. And so a lot of times he's not going to just force things. I mean, I could probably count on one hand how many times he did that. And so I think when he's going, it just means our offense is going because he does a lot of slashing, a lot of cutting to the basket. He doesn't need the ball to get to his spots and be effective. And then obviously the 3-point shooting, that was kind of Duke's season as a whole. And so if he hits double figures, you're probably thinking this is a game where he shot 2 of 3 or 2 of 4, 3 of 5 from 3 or something like that versus those, 0 of 1 or 1 of 5 or something like that. So it just added that extra component, opened up the floor, spaced a little bit. Defenses couldn't collapse on us. So, I think it just, our season as a whole, our offense as a whole, when he was going, it just the collective kind of benefited.
I think you look at next year's squad, and again, certain things have to be kind of ironed out, but I do think there will be some scores coming into the mix for Duke. So it's not necessary that Mark Mitchell really greatly improves those scoring numbers, but I just think it's a matter of, hey, I'm a sophomore compared to a freshman. I know what to expect. It is time for me to be a little bit more aggressive, and I think that we'll certainly see that from Mark going forward. The one thing we haven't highlighted at all yet, Josh, is his defense, and that's what we were talking about at the end of the season because he wasn't available to guard Olivier Nkamhoua from Tennessee in that last matchup of the year. But his defense, night in and night out, continuously proved to be one of the best on-ball defenders, if not the best, that Duke had this entire season.
Oh, for sure. And I think that's where his versatility really lies. I mean, he's a kind of 5-tool offensive guy, but what he can do defensively, and, you hear a lot of times that, oh, guys can switch 1 through 5. This guy can guard 1 through 5. That gets tossed out a lot. Mark can actually do it like effectively 1 through 5, can definitively defend each position well. And so when you have that, if John wants to switch, if he wants to do some drop stuff, if he wants to box in one, get creative, you have a guy that can play free safety for you and just do it all. Like if you think of what Justice Winslow did to that 2015 team down the stretch, Coach K just put him at safety and was like, do your thing, just read the defense, make the plays, put him at the 4. I think Mark is right in that mold. And so that gives you just a huge weapon. And if you look next, another guy, not to get too far ahead of ourselves, but thinking about having him and like Sean Stewart, Proctor, and Foster on the 4 together, all really good defenders. It really opens up how we could play.
Yeah, no, excited to see what they're able to do with next year's squad and ways for these guys to improve. And I think that's how we're going to kind of wrap up our conversation here today. We want to talk about Mark Mitchell and Kyle Filipowski. How do they improve going into their sophomore seasons? Josh Smith continues with us here in just a moment on Locked On Blue Devils. Thank you so much for making Locked On Blue Devils your first listen every single day. I want to give a word to our everydayers. That's right, my everydayers who are with us each and every day here on Locked On Blue Devils. Coming up on tomorrow's show, we're going to continue end-of-year reviews for Duke men's basketball. We're going to have our guys, Derek Lively II and Derek Whitehead, will be breaking down their games coming up on tomorrow's show. Also, make sure you check out Locked On College Basketball. Hosts Isaac Shade and Andy Patton do an amazing job telling you everything that you need to know about the college basketball game. They're all over the transfer portal, NBA draft decisions set to be made by those guys and more. So go check out Locked On College Basketball on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast. Winding down today's episode of Locked On Blue Devils, JJ Jackson alongside my pal Josh Smith from the Devil's Den podcast. Plug your show for me, man. Tell me a little bit about the Devil's Den podcast.
Yeah, I appreciate it. So we just had our 75th episode as the three of us. So Raul, Shu, and I.
Yeah.
So that's kind of cool. Appreciate everyone's support. I finally broke down and got on the Twitterverse. And so I finally made a Twitter for the pod. So you can follow us over there, Devil's Den Pod 247, or the handle JJ has here at the Devil's Den. That's for John Watson, Adam Rowe, and those guys do a phenomenal job over there on the boards. You can find us anywhere, Apple, Google, Spotify, wherever you listen. So we appreciate the content and the support.
So awesome. Yeah, absolutely. Make sure you're supporting their work and give them a 5-star rating and review on whatever podcast platform you so choose. So as we're talking about these kind of sophomore seasons ahead for Filipowski and Mark Mitchell, we've already talked about this once again, but for anybody that missed it, just your thoughts, Josh, on the idea that we do get to see a sophomore season for both of these guys.
Yeah, I mean, it's huge. I guess I dropped the ball a little bit. I'm wearing my Tyrese Proctor shirt, so the one guy we're not talking about. I think it's just a culture change a little bit, and it's so refreshing. I think our fan base, I'll speak for me, got a little just stale and burnt out on the replacement model. There's so much pressure to win it all because you feel like we only have these guys for 6 months and then we're just doing it again and we're doing it again. So to not just get one, but to get 3 of those guys back, I think that's huge. I think we're doing a great job with Rachel Baker and NIL and making it, an option for guys to be able to come back. And I think that's the future of it. I think the 4-year player model, unfortunately, is just almost out the door now with the way, things are and the portal and everything else. So if you get a 2-and-done, a 3-and-done model going now, I think that's the best pitch, and it offers you the best continuity, and you can still get talent because you can get those 15 to 20 top 10 guys to maybe stay a second year. Those dudes aren't staying 4 anymore. Come on.
Right, but 2 is better than
Sure.
1, and so the improvement there, to your point, is super exciting to see, to get familiar with them again. There are so many factors. I'm glad you mentioned NIL and the money earning opportunity that's now available in college. Here you are endorsing Tyrese Proctor and some of the awesome product that he's now got available, which is just super exciting for those guys. So looking at Filipowski and Mitchell in particular, one way that they can each improve going into next season, what are you looking for?
Yeah, I think for Mark, it's just being a little bit more aggressive, right? I'd like to see him kind of take the ball off the rim, off that defensive rebound, and kind of push a little bit and be a little bit more of that initiator. Like to see the driving lanes open up so he can penetrate. When he's in attack mode, he's very tough to guard. He gets to the free throw line, pretty good from there. For Flip, it's just a little bit of that decision making, right? Reducing some of those spin moves, starting too far out a little bit, kind of staying within himself. I think the shot will be there. I mean, we saw Matt Jones, Luke Kennard shoot terribly as freshmen. Those guys are great shooters. I think Flip, that'll just come. It'll be there. Just the decision making a little bit, right? Finishing better around the rim, reducing some of those turnovers. It'll come. I feel pretty good about where he's at, where the staff will have him. So just those two things greatly improve efficiency, and maybe we get to kind of get past that Tennessee this year.
Yeah, no, I certainly think the expectations are really high for this program going into next season. Efficiency is something that you're always aiming to improve, right? And so I think his experience plays a factor in that. It's going to be a little bit easier. The aggressiveness piece, though, for both of those guys is something I want to see. Something I haven't touched on specifically since the end of the year. And I know that I've seen some commentary on YouTube here within our videos. I want to give a shout out to Chris Carroll, who is an avid listener here to the program. But out of 363 Division I men's basketball teams, Duke was 127th in free throw rate. So very far down there in terms of how often are you actually going to the free throw line. And Duke this past year was actually a team inside the top 30 in terms of knocking down free throws. And so when you look at someone like Kyle Filipowski, who was your primary scorer, and even someone like Mark Mitchell, who, believe it or not, did have a fine stroke at the free throw line, we got to find a way, Josh, to get them more attempts at the charity stripe.
Yeah, and even Tyrese Proctor, too. He's a guy that was at one point
like
90%. Yes, absolutely. And so it's going through, it's getting to the rim. Part of that is the lane has to open up. If you're not able to drive to the rim, then you're probably not getting fouled as much. And that's one of the downsides of playing two bigs in college basketball without, all of the restrictions there, with the lane being able to stay clogged. So getting maybe a little more creative. And I think just having that experience will help, especially for our freshmen coming in. They don't have to carry that weight. And I'm looking for Proctor, Mitchell, and Flip to kind of set that tone of like, no, this is Duke. This is our team. Like, they're in it. They're invested. The culture's there. They are the culture, which is pretty cool for them to be able to carry that as a class. And so, you almost have to go back to Paulus McRoberts. And the last time we've had two highly ranked freshmen come back at the same time. That's wild.
That's a long time ago.
Yeah.
That is a really long time ago. Shout out Greg Paulus and Josh McRoberts.
Yeah.
Those names have not been said on this program in ages. So
been a while.
That's amazing. No, I do think those two guys, speaking of Filipowski and Mitchell, have got to kind of set the tone.
Yeah.
Proctor as well, as a sophomore. That needs to be the mantra every day in practice. Like, free throws, free throws, free throws. We're making them. We know we can make them. Let's be aggressive. So that we get fouled and get the chance to earn those free points.
Yeah. And play to the contact, it's not try to avoid it. Sometimes we did do that a lot, and it's just got to go up strong and take it to them. And I think you'll see that with those three. I mean, usually if you look back at some of our more recent guys that have came back for that sophomore year, look at Luke Kennard's sophomore year, look at what Trey Jones became as a sophomore. So you start to get some of these highly ranked, highly talented guys coming back. And I'm not saying every single one of them is going to make this huge jump. That might not happen. But if just two of them do, you potentially have something special there, especially inside out with Proctor and then Flip Mitchell kind of manning that post area.
Well, this has been a whole lot of fun, a really good conversation talking about the sophomore seasons for Mark Mitchell and Kyle Filipowski. Josh, in conclusion, before we get you out of here, you talk frequently about your show, the Devil's Den Podcast. Tell me kind of the plans moving forward. I know it is a little bit of a downtime. It's May 1st, but where can people find the work, and how frequently do you think they're going to be able to listen to you guys?
Yeah. So like I said, all the major podcast platforms. In the off season, we do it a little bit differently. We actually have been doing one a week, but I think that'll kind of die down a little bit.
As news dies off, that'll tend to happen.
Yeah, we just had Ryan Woman on from Duke Nation, so talk to him a little bit. Go check him out. And then we've got some plans to bring some NBA guys on to talk about the draft and some of our guys in the playoffs and just in the NBA world. Obviously, we have a ton of the Brotherhood dudes over there. So I'd like to get that on. Would like to get a recruiting analyst to come on sometime again. Once the portal closes and the news cycle starts to kind of solidify, we're going to try to get some guests on. We'll have to have some coaches on. Those guys are busy. And I don't know how familiar you are, JJ, but sometimes getting access into those types can be
incredibly
a little
complicated. Yep.
Yeah. So we'll see. We'll see. At least we're going to do 2 a month. And then once the season gets back rolling, we'll be back to once a week again.
Awesome. Well, we'll be listening to it. And thanks again for the visit today, Josh. Really appreciate it.
Take care, JJ.
That's my pal Josh Smith from the Devil's Den podcast joining us here on today's show. Thanks so much for your support here of Locked On Blue Devils. We're going to be back at it tomorrow with a brand new show talking about Derek Lively II and Dariq Whitehead. That's going to do it for today's show. As always, go Duke. I'll talk to you tomorrow. My name is JJ Jackson. Thank you and good day.